11-year-old Sabrina Bowie was the daughter of Brenda Johnson and Ronnie Bowie. She had a 4-year-old sister named Tanita, and the family stayed in Red Springs. Sabrina was tall with short hair and had a talent for Pac-Man at the neighborhood arcade. People who knew her said she was always hanging around that arcade, which was attached to the back of a small convenience store nearby. On this day, Sabrina was at the front yard of the home, and her sister Tanita recalled that she said she'd go return a bike that belonged to her neighbor, 15-year-old Leon Brown. However, on the same day, another neighbor, 20-year-old Mary McLean, went to the convenience store when she saw Sabrina passionately playing a pinball machine. Before she left, she gave Sabrina another $1 to continue playing the game and went about her day. However, once the night fell, Sabrina's family became extremely concerned about her whereabouts, and when she still didn't turn up back to the home the next day, her father Ronnie phoned the police to report her missing. Around 20 police officers began the search for Sabrina, and to their horror, they discovered her body on the 26th. She was found with some of her clothes removed just a short walk away from the convenience store and in the underbrush of a soybean field beside a 2-lane country road. At the crime scene, police recovered cigarette butts, beer cans, articles of her bloodied clothing, blood-stained sticks, and a blood-stained board of plywood. An autopsy was conducted and revealed more horrifying details: that she was assaulted and suffocated by her own underwear pushed down her throat with a stick. Two days later, an 11th grade white teenaged girl named Ethel Firmage informed the police that she had information about the crime. She told Detective Seeley and Agent Sneed that she had heard at school that 19-year-old Henry McCollum had something to do with Sabrina's murder. Later that evening, the police went to Henry's house. In the home, there was his mother and his younger half-brother, Leon Brown. The officers asked for Henry to return to the police station with them, so he agreed and went alone. At the station, police aggressively interrogated him, despite his repeated denials of having any involvement. For hours, they were yelling at him to admit to the crime, pounding the table, hurling racial slurs, and forcing him to sign a waiver of his Miranda rights. During the ordeal, Henry's mother showed up to the police station to check on Henry and brought along Leon. She could hear the interrogators' accusations of murder through the closed door, with them saying, "Didn't you kill Sabrina Bowie?" It was at that moment she tried to open the door, but it was locked. An officer then threatened her with arrest if she didn't sit down in the waiting area. She could hear Henry cry out his innocence over and over again, and that's when she ran outside. She said she was in the street crying and asking God to help her. In the room, Agent Sneed then drafted a confession, and the officers told Henry that they would let him go home if he signed, but he would get the gas chamber if he refused. After almost 5 hours of an intense interrogation, Henry gave in and signed the confession prepared for him. Afterwards, he was released from the room and started to head home as he was promised, but the officers arrested him based on the signed confession. While his mother was outside, police saw Leon alone and asked to speak with him. Upon entering the room for an interview, they used the same tactics on him to get a confession. They told him if he did not confess, he'd face the death penalty. Similarly, Agent Locklear drafted a confession for him to sign and said he'd go home if he signed, or he'd be sent to the gas chamber if he didn't. Scared and miserable after 4 hours of questioning, Leon signed. He stated that he did not understand what he had signed and wrote his name in childish block letters. What they signed was a confession that stated Henry committed the murder, along with Leon and 3 other high schoolers. The 5 of them were with Sabrina the evening she disappeared and made sexual advances towards her. When she refused, they jointly assaulted her and quickly realized they would have to get rid of her so the police wouldn't find out. That's when one of them killed her by suffocation and another stabbed her, though her body actually had no stab wounds. Together, they dragged her body across the field and left her in a shallow ditch. The next day, police charged the boys with the rape and murder of Sabrina Bowie, and they were held at separate jails without bond. No charges were ever filed against the other 3 teenagers implicated in the confessions. In fact, they had airtight alibis, and 2 were proven out of town at the time of the murder. Less than a week later, after Ethel's tip, she admitted that she lied and told investigators that she did not receive any information that Henry was really involved. She suspected that he was involved because he was crazy and that he just does not act right. Henry McCollum actually suffered from a severe intellectual disability, and while he was in high school, he dropped out at 16 as he performed at the level of an 8 to 10-year-old. He also had brain damage and an extremely low ability to comprehend language, to understand things like his Miranda rights or the language used in the written confessions. Leon Brown was even more intellectually challenged and nearly illiterate, scoring 55 on a recent IQ test. Anything that's lower than 70 indicates intellectual disability. Both have never been in legal trouble before. The city felt brief peace now that the monstrous young murderers were off the streets. That was until it struck again. While the boys were in jail awaiting trial, a missing persons report was filed for 18-year-old Joanne Brockman less than a month after Sabrina's murder. Later that same day, her body was found. Similarly, she had been sexually assaulted and strangled just a mile from Sabrina's site. Witnesses claimed to have seen Joanne with a 43-year-old man named Roscoe Artis, and he was quickly identified as a suspect in her case. Roscoe Artis was born on December 2, 1941, in Rayford, North Carolina. He attended Laurel Hill Elementary and Upchurch High School, and somewhere along his life, he had 4 children. During the police's investigation into Roscoe, police interviewed a woman named Billy Ann Woods, who was a previous victim of him. She stated that when she was 16, he tried to drag her into the woods and sexually assault her. Police also discovered that he was suspected 3 years prior with another rape and murder of a young teenage girl, Bernice Moss. Similar to Sabrina and Joanne, she was found dead near a wooded area, nude from the waist down, and apparently beaten to death with a stick and an object stuffed in her throat. He was never investigated as a suspect in Sabrina Bowie's case. Additionally, the fingerprints on the beer cans found at the scene did not match either Henry or Leon. There was no physical evidence linking them to the crime. None of these exonerating facts after their arrest were ever shared with the both of them. Instead, the two headed to trial in October 1984 with their confessions as the main evidence against them. 2 months prior, Roscoe Artis quickly confessed to Joanne Brockman's murder and was initially sentenced to death in August 1984, but his sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment in 1989. Both Henry and Leon were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death shortly after. At 16, Leon Brown's death sentence made him the youngest person on death row at the time. In 1988, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned both of their death sentences due to a jury instruction error, and the two were tried separately this time. In 1991, Henry held the same convictions and sentence, while the jury only convicted Leon of the assault and resentenced him to life imprisonment. Following their sentencing, the brothers became the poster children for pro-death penalty advocates, with Supreme Court justices citing this case to argue in favor of the constitutionality. In 2010, Henry's prison mugshot appeared on a flyer that the state's Republican Party mailed to voters to generate fear and criticize Democrats of being soft on crime. Meanwhile, Henry worked as a janitor during his time on death row. He quickly became traumatized and deeply affected by each death of other inmates, to the point where it caused severe depression and suicidal thoughts. Other inmates also commonly targeted Henry for violence and abuse due to his alleged victim being a young girl. Tragically, Leon Brown told his sister that he was raped by inmates and guards would tie him to his bunk. He would often rock in place and refuse to eat and drink for days. He also had multiple episodes of psychosis in prison. On the other hand, Henry became very close with a criminal named John Rook, who kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered a nurse walking from work. In a rough environment where no one was friendly to him, John Rook was his first friend. Henry said, "I didn't look at him like a killer. People do change in prison. That man was like a brother to me." Following Rook's execution in 1986, Henry attempted suicide. During his time, he experienced the executions of 42 inmates on death row. He once said, "I'm tired. I don't know when they are going to kill me." Leon Brown was on death row for only 3 years until his conviction changed. He also learned how to read in prison. Both Henry and Leon visited each other every year until 2012, after which they wrote to each other every month. In 2010, and over 25 years in prison, an inmate suggested for Leon Brown to apply to the North Carolina Innocence Inquiry Commission to look into his conviction. Leon's disabilities prevented him from filling out the form himself, so another inmate completed it for him. The commission accepted his case and requested for the cigarette butt to be retested. Just 6 years prior, Henry requested the same, but all that was found with technology at the time was that the DNA did not match him or Leon. Upon this request, it was revealed that the DNA on the cigarette butt matched Roscoe Artis, who was still serving his life sentence for Joanne's murder. Over the next 4 years, the commission would put the puzzle together. They discovered Roscoe's criminal history. He was a serial rapist, a suspected serial killer, and a habitual offender. He also lived just around the corner from Sabrina's house in 1983. In fact, Sabrina and other kids in the neighborhood used to walk a path through the woods that ran behind his home to the convenience store. Her body was found just a few feet and right across the street from his home. They also pieced together the similar fashion of Joanne and Bernice with Sabrina. Additionally, someone in Sabrina's murder investigation submitted a request for Roscoe's fingerprint records to be compared to the ones found on the beer cans near her body, but for whatever reason, the request was canceled. They realized that the Red Springs Police Department had vindicating evidence all along, but deliberately withheld it from their defense teams. They also found the written confession's facts were inconsistent and incorrect. They even interviewed Roscoe Artis, who acknowledged that Sabrina had been to his house the day she went missing and that she typically would come over most days. While on death row, he repeatedly told other inmates that Henry and Leon were innocent of Sabrina's murder. Similarly, he also suggested to the police during his interviews that they were not responsible. The commission then sent a box of evidence collected to be retested, and the testing returned yet another positive match to Roscoe. They concluded that Henry and Leon were both innocent for Sabrina's murder and that it likely belonged to Roscoe Artis. The commission then filed a motion for appropriate relief after their findings for the brothers. Following a hearing, the judge quickly declared them innocent and exonerated both Henry and Leon. The brothers were released the following day, September 3rd, 2014, almost 31 years later. Upon their release, the men received only $45 each and were ineligible for more since they were not formally pardoned. In the meantime, they lived off charity money. In 2015, the state's governor, Pat McCrory, formally pardoned both of them, calling it the right thing to do, which permitted them to seek more compensation for their wrongful imprisonment. The old prosecutor in their case, Joe Freeman Britt, opposed their request for a pardon and compensation. However, 2 months later, the brothers filed a federal civil rights suit requesting compensation and seeking damages from the sheriff's office and specific officers in their case. They were soon awarded the maximum amount allowed in state compensation, which was $750,000. However, they unfortunately became victims of financial predation. Once they received money in their suit, they became prime targets for predatory interests from their attorneys, family members, and several advocates. A federal judge had to intervene in 2017, and by this time, their compensation had almost been completely spent on predatory loans, excessive legal fees, cars, women's jewelry, children's toys, and split among other people. Their intellectual disabilities made them even more susceptible to financial predation than most exonerees. And one of their attorney's licenses was suspended, and he was ordered to repay $250,000 in state compensation money that he took. However, in 2021, they were awarded with a cumulative $75 million. Each received $31 million, one for each year served, along with $13 million in punitive damages. The same tired agents and detectives, Leroy Allen and Ken Sneed from the interrogation rooms, tried to maintain that the men were still guilty, continuing to call them rapists and murderers, despite their exoneration 7 years ago. Nonetheless, this was the largest award for a wrongful conviction in U.S. history. They now require court-appointed legal guardians to manage their finances and other aspects of their lives.
Well, I can't really describe it, right? But it feel good. It feel good. After 30 years in prison for something we didn't do or nothing.
It's a blessing to be free.
And I thank God for that.
What you want to do now?
Well, me, right now, I want to go home. I want to get in the tub. I want to think, eat some food. And then I want to lay down. And then when I wake up the next day, I want to see this real. I want to, just pinch myself.
After the men were released, Sabrina Bowie's family was devastated at this news, as they still believed they were connected to her murder. The tired investigator in their case, Ken Sneed, also believed that Henry and Leon's confessions were true, despite DNA evidence excluding them as possible suspects. He told a newspaper that their confessions contained information that only someone who committed the crime could have known. However, their attorneys maintained that the boys were fed information collected by the police, mainly Leroy Allen, who attended Sabrina's autopsy the day before the confessions. Leon Brown's time on death row and long imprisonment afterwards caused him severe mental health problems that require him full-time care. His psychosis from prison worsened, and between 2015 and 2018, he stayed in psychiatric hospitals about 20 times. In 2018, Leon lived in a group home in North Carolina, although he opposed the living arrangement and claimed, "A judge put me here. I want my freedom." He also expressed interest in starting his own church or radio Christian ministry. Meanwhile, Henry McCollum relocated to Virginia with his fiancée. He also began writing a book about his life and expressed a desire to move Leon Brown to Virginia with him so the two stepbrothers could rebuild what was taken from them. Unfortunately, their mother, Mamie Brown, died in June 2013. She died believing her two sons would die in prison and unfortunately did not live long enough to see them become free men a year later. They also lost their grandmother while in prison. Tanita Bowie, Sabrina's sister, passed away in 2021. Roscoe Artis never admitted to the crime all his life, but finally died in prison in December 2020 at 79. The New York Times described the case as a judicial horror story, and they were right. To enter prison as a teenager and exit nearing 50 for a crime you did not commit is unforgivable. No amount of compensation could recoup the time lost and the smearing and trauma endured. Wishing Henry and Leon plenty of peace and fruitful lives of time left. And wishing all of the prosecutors and officers involved a slow burn. And thank you all for watching.